All right, Joe, both you and I have the same follow-up from last time, which is to talk about our failures. I think we should probably start by talking about how we failed so we can complete this one.
Okay. How'd you fail?
How did I fail? Well, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. Like, I knew I was going to do this, but now that we're here, it's kind of difficult.
Actually, so like as in it's harder to talk about it or it's harder to admit it or...
Yeah, it's easy to conceptually say, yeah, I want to talk about my failures, but actually doing it is something totally different.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the point why I decided to open with this. But so I guess I'll talk about one of the things that I consider a failure over the last couple weeks is that I have been trying to arrange things in my life so that I am not stressed out by a long list of things that I should be doing. But I found myself creating a situation where I couldn't live up to my own expectations. It wasn't even impacted or influenced by somebody else saying, hey, you should really be doing this. I just kind of did it to myself. But last week, it kind of all came to a head. I couldn't keep up. And I noticed I was in a bit of a funk for a couple of days. And I feel like it took somebody calling me on it for me to even realize that this was happening and it was affecting my relationships with other people, not just my family even, but like people at church, people that are around me every day. Like they saw it, I didn't. And right away I'm like, I did it again. I failed again. And I better talk about this on Bookworm since that's what we said we were going to do.
Nice. I'm sorry.
So Mike is a failure. Have you failed?
Yes. I can't say that I have something that's like that large to like say here, but I had quite a few cases. You know, I work in IT, so I screw things up a lot. I've just become more willing to talk about those failures, and one of those in particular that I was doing this. I think it was right after we recorded, actually. A couple of days after that, I got a phone call on a Sunday afternoon, and it was from our youth worship band leader who had a very simple question. Do you know where our keyboard is? Yep. It's in the back of my truck.
Whoops.
Totally screwed that one up. I was supposed to have set up a handful of things on that stage for them before Sunday night, and I just completely spaced. And I had it written down. I just didn't even get to the list, so it didn't even register. And I had to, last minute, after dinner, hustle, take a keyboard back to the church, set it all up, make sure they were ready to go, and then come home, put the girls down for bed. Don't do that again. But,
Whoops.
You know, I simply told them, I'm sorry, I just completely screwed this one up. I will do my best not to make this happen again. So, yes, despite all the OmniFocus stuff and reminders and Do app and all the things that are supposed to tell Joe what he should be doing, I still forget things and screw them up. Such is life.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, I think, like our examples here. And I hope this kind of inspires some other people to think about maybe some of the ways that they've failed, because my takeaway from doing this exercise live on the air is that...
Which he did not warn me about, by the way.
Nope, I just threw this on you. I figured it's about time I got you back somehow. No, but the interesting observation right now, I think, is that as we share these things, no matter how big the failure happens to be, it doesn't have to be a fatal mistake. Like once you verbalize these things and you recognize that, yeah, I made a mistake, it's kind of like the act of expressing that you have failed as the words come out of your mouth, that lessens the gravity of the thing. It's like that's the thing that allows you to move on to the next thing, which I think was kind of what Ed Catmull was getting at when he was talking about in the last book, Creativity Inc., how they were trying to fail as fast as they could, because it's like, okay, until we fail and recognize that we failed, then we're never going to get to where we really want to go. So we're not looking to fail, but when it happens, we just recognize it. And then from there, we can course correct. And that's kind of like a save point for us,
Right.
And we can continue on our journey. So there, now we can both check off our action items.
I'm doing
now you have
right
one
now.
more action item.
I do.
Yeah, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so I was wanting to take the concepts and principles that came from the book Creativity Inc. about how to build a culture and an organization that is able to continue to be creative and successful in that creative endeavor. I was trying to figure out, how does this apply to our church, because I feel like our nonprofit religious organization could follow a lot of these same principles and go down that same path. And although I don't have anything really concrete I can share here, I can say that it's a fascinating endeavor to at least explore with other people in leadership at the church, because the 2 or 3, 4 people that I talked to about it all immediately saw how the church is a very creative organization and had all kinds of questions about it. So those have at least started, but I don't know that I could really share that. It's not really my place to do that because it comes from my leadership at the church and all behind closed doors at this point. So sorry, can't say much more than that. So, but it has been a fascinating conversation, to say the least.
Nice.
There's that. One last thing before we jump into today's book, and I told Mike this as we were jumping on here. I've been doing a bunch of things on Instagram lately and trying to get that where I want it to be, and have been doing some things with like the Instagram stories here and there. So if you are on Instagram and you want to see some book stuff and you want to keep up with Bookworm, link in the show notes. Click the link, follow us.
I never thought that of the two of us, you would be the one driving all the social media stuff, but good job.
I know, right? It's one of those things where I don't, like, a handful of people have already reached out to me and said, Joe, you must be on this a lot. Like, no, I just spent some time early on in the week and set it all up. And then I mostly just sit back and watch. So I get to watch it just like everyone else.
Oh yeah, I forgot I said that.
Yeah. Oh, right. I did set that up. That's kind of cool.
Nice.
That's a cool picture. Good job, Mike.
All right. So today's book is Ultralearning by Scott Young. This was my pick. It was a highly recommended book from the Bookworm Club. And the basic premise of this is applying this idea called ultralearning to advance the skills that you want to develop without doing it the traditional way.
I think about this as a book that teaches you how to learn outside the traditional learning mechanisms.
Yeah, so it actually starts in the first part here, which I've labeled what is ultralearning. Let's actually just real briefly talk about the structure of this book, because you probably could break it down into a couple different sections, but he doesn't. He's got a bunch of different chapters. There's 14 different chapters. We're not going to try to go through all of them. I've attempted to put them into sections in our outline here. So chapter 1 is, can you get an MIT education without going to MIT? This is based off of an experiment that Scott Young did. And we'll get into that in a second here. Chapter 2, why ultralearning matters. Chapter 3, how to become an ultralearner. So these 3, I think, maybe comprise like a section, but I've broken it into 2 points. What is ultralearning, then how to become an ultralearner, because there's a couple different things inside of each of those that we'll unpack. And then the majority of the book is 9 different principles of ultralearning, which in the mind of a file is kind of weird because it's like chapter 4, principle 1, chapter 5, principle 2, chapter 6, principle 3.
Yeah.
Because there is no section header for these, right?
Right.
But there are 9 principles that he talks about. So the first principle is meta learning. Principle 2 is focus. Principle 3 is directness. Principle 4 is drill. Principle 5 is retrieval. Principle 6 is feedback. Principle 7, retention. Principle 8, intuition. Principle 9, experimentation. And then picking up in chapter 13, your first ultralearning project. He's got steps for you to apply this stuff and pick an ultra learning project for yourself. And then chapter 14, an unconventional education, talks about how you can encourage others to embrace ultra learning, whether those be children, coworkers, etc. So that's the bones of the book. We're going to start here with what I'll call the first section, just what is ultra learning? Because again, we're not trying to recreate everything that's in this book. We want to tease out some of the key concepts that really stood out to us. But it is interesting how he starts with what he terms as the MIT challenge.
Before you get too far into that, a couple things here. One, the foreword on this is written by James Clear. This is after, so it's a recent book. It's a 2019 book, right? Yes. And
think so.
James Clear wrote this after Atomic Habits was out, or at least in its process of coming out. And he absolutely loves a lot of the stuff in this book. It also has a lot of accolades from Cal Newport as well. So between those two, I can't say that this was a book that was on my radar, but because those two have such high remarks about this, it kind of put it at another level for me before I even got into it. So just wanted to point that out. There is quite a bit of credibility behind this, even though it's been out a very short amount of time.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. It's kind of funny if you look at the very last, at the end of the book, he's got his page of thanks.
Right.
And he says, thank you to Mr. Calvin Newport.
Yes.
First time I've ever heard him called Calvin. I'm like, wait a second. Oh, Cal Newport. Right.
Who are you talking about? Who's Calvin?
Yeah. Makes sense though. I mean, these three guys seem like peas in a pod.
Yes. Yes.
So Scott Young, going back to chapter 1, his story, which kind of lays the groundwork for everything that's in this book, is what he calls the MIT challenge. This is when he wanted to get an MIT degree. So a little bit of his background briefly. He went to the University of Manitoba. He got a bachelor's of commerce degree. He didn't like it, but he also didn't like the idea of going back to school, taking out more loans, and investing several years to get a different degree. So he found some MIT classes online for free. He signed up. He enjoyed them, decided to try to get a degree without the paperwork through these free online classes because all he wanted was the skills. So he tried to recreate an MIT computer science degree using these free online courses and then challenge himself to do it in only 12 months. So the book starts with the story of him right before he takes a final exam for one of these classes that he signed up for. And he's basically cranking through one of these classes every week. So he's like, this is really stressful. I'm taking this final exam on stuff that I just started learning this week. And next week I have to do it again.
Which is not something you really want to hear if you're going to MIT.
Yeah, true.
Oh, this guy just went through my entire class in a week.
Yep.
That's not something you really want to hear.
Yeah, well, I have my own buyer's remorse around this from when we went through the personal MBA, to tell you the truth, because I went to a private a liberal arts college here in Wisconsin, which was super expensive, and got a business degree. And when we went through the personal MBA, I think I learned more about business from that book than I did in the
I remember
100,000 plus, I invested in the degree. So yeah, there's a lot of other reasons you may want to go to college, but to get the skills that are going to help you in the workplace is not the primary one, especially for something like a business degree. I remember looking at the $100 MBA by Omar Zenholm when it came out.
Yeah.
Omar's a pretty smart guy, and his story, I think, kind of articulates this really well. I'm going to paraphrase it, but basically, he was teaching business at a university, if I remember correctly, and he wanted to implement some new material into the curriculum because everything in the curriculum was basically like, here's how you manage people in a factory. He's like, well, that's not going to help my students in the 21st century. So he found some stuff, he submitted it, and all right, we'll review this and we'll get back to you in 18 months. He's like, what? By that point, everything will have changed again.
Yeah.
So he's like, this is ridiculous. I want to equip people with the skills they need to be successful. Maybe the university setting isn't the right way to do it. So he just took what he knew and created an online video course called the $100 MBA, which I had gone through, and there's some good stuff in there. I don't know that you could do like an apples to apples comparison of like that versus an actual MBA. Same thing with like the personal MBA, the book. But the long and short of it is, if you're looking for something that's going to move the needle, especially respective to the amount that you're going to invest in it, you can do a lot better than a college degree for a lot of things. Now, some careers, you need the degree, you need the certification, whatever. So that's a little bit different. But just in terms of what you're going to learn, Ultralearning is kind of challenging the idea that you have to do it this way for a lot of different reasons. There's some things specifically about the university setting, the classroom setting, that Scott Young argues isn't set up for ideal success. So you're kind of working with a broken system if you're really just trying to maximize the amount that you're trying to get from what you're doing. But therein is another principle, which I'm sure we'll unpack as we go, is like, do you really have to pick the most effective way to do everything in your life?
Right.
I've been thinking a lot about that lately. And I don't know. I mean, I think personally I'm at this point where, and I've been here for a little while, where it comes to like when it comes to the efficiency, like I just am done with that. I want to be effective. But I guess what I'm realizing more and more is that effective doesn't even mean the shortest distance between 2 points necessarily. Sometimes it's worth going a little bit slower so you can enjoy the journey.
Yes.
And you can apply that a lot of different ways to your specific situation. Only you can really define what the best way to do that is for you. But the tone of Ultralearning is just go, 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 on to the next thing. And that, I have to admit, kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Sure. Well, I kind of have a little bit different take on this because, so my degree is in agricultural business. So I've got a quasi-business degree as well. In my case, there was a lot of agriculture classes that came with that, which were extremely helpful, and I actually still use in a lot of ways today. But when I went to work outside of that, I was doing soybean seed research and learned about all the data that goes into seed research and got into the statistical side of things. And although I had never taken like a statistics type of class, I had to deep dive statistics and understand it at a much deeper level in order to do my job well with the data side of it. And I kind of did a miniature Ultralearning project, if you would call it that, in that sense, in just doing tons and tons of online research and reading books on it. And that allowed me to then pick up a job as a data analyst, where I continued to work on those analysis skills, but it also taught me how to work with computers at a higher level. That then led to me doing a lot of the online web development stuff that I still do on the side today. So I've taken like a couple of these different scenarios, done some of these, I would call them small Ultralearning projects in order to continually grow my overall career. But like what you're saying, I think, Mike, is like that particular, like that journey that I just explained to you was a 10-year journey. Like those 2, maybe 3 of these projects took 10 years to work through that. It was not something like, oh, I want to do this next in my career, I'm going to go pick up statistics and then I'm going to run with that. No, that wasn't the case at all. This was a process of me just like, oh, this is interesting. My current job needs me to do this, so I'm going to pick up that. And then it allowed me to continue to grow with that. But I think what he's like, I didn't come away from this thinking that everything you do needs to be an Ultralearning project. You need to go at it with full force and learn it at the deepest levels. I don't see that. Like, I didn't see that from this book, but maybe that's because I just didn't catch it. That was my take on it. It's like, whenever there's something that you want to deep dive, or that you want to learn a deeper skill or an adjacent skill, like that's when you can use this process to do that. Do you follow me, Mike?
Yes. So I kind of think my career path is probably similar to yours, where I have implemented pieces of this. And as we go through the different principles, I've applied some of these. But I also am projecting here, but I believe that Scott Young would say you guys weren't ultra learning.
That could be.
Because the examples that he shares, like, it's a very short time frame that you're doing this stuff in. And in the first chapter, he's got a couple other examples of people who like learn to speak and master a language in 3 months. And the popular belief when it comes to the best way to learn a new language is immersion, right? And he's even saying like immersion, going to the place where they speak the language, that's not good enough. Like, because if you're there with a friend, you're going to speak English when things are hard, and you have to push yourself into those positions that are hard and force yourself to do the thing. And I'm guessing that both you and I didn't put our necks on the line when we were trying to develop a new skill. We did it on the side. You know, there was a safety net there. We could always go back to doing what we were doing previously.
Yeah, that's true.
It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to walk away from my job and I'm going to become a writer. I've never written before, so I'm just going to write as much as I can in 3 months. And by the end of it, boom, I will be a professional writer. Like, that wasn't the process we took. So I don't know, maybe that's just my definition, but I do think in this first chapter here, he kind of talks about ultra learning and how it's pursuing these extreme self-directed learning projects. I don't think either of ours were really extreme. And I also think maybe you don't have to push yourself to the extreme all the time. As he's talking about all these different ultra learning projects, I'm like, well, yeah, you're acquiring a lot of skills quickly, but aren't you going to burn yourself out? Like, at some point, you're just going to be like, this is dumb. Why am I doing this? And you're going to walk away.
Sure.
There's no way you're going to do this till you're 85, buddy, you know?
And if you do, you will be a very ranging expertise on that person.
You're going to be an expert in so many things, but you're not going to have any friends. Like, that's
or they'll all speak so many different languages they can't all get together.
Yeah. And that's a little bit unfair of a characterization, but so a couple other characteristics here of ultra learning, just to kind of paint the picture for what Scott Young defines this as. All ultra learners are unique, he says, but they do share some common characteristics. They usually work alone. Their interests tend towards obsessions. They're aggressive about optimizing their strategies, and they care about learning above all else. And that's the thing that doesn't really sit well with me, is like, well, why do you want to learn this stuff? Is it so that you can check a box? Is that so that you can say, I have achieved a certain level of mastery? Or does it actually impact your day-to-day? What I'm more and more realizing the older that I get is that the day-to-day really is not about what you get done during the day, but about the relationships and the people that you interact with. I think Chris Bailey is the one who said, the reason for productivity is people. You know, I'm realizing that more and more. And so it doesn't matter if I write 10,000 words a day. If I don't make a positive impact in somebody's life because I'm too busy, that's a failure of a day. And not every time, obviously. There's different scenarios and different seasons and all that. You know, you got to keep the right thing at the right time, keep the main thing. But more and more, my main thing is less about what I'm able to crank out and more about how I'm able to make people feel. That part is like completely missing in this book, I believe.
I think that maybe depends on how you approach your ultra learning project.
True.
Because there were cases, and even one of the principles when it comes to like drilling and such, you don't necessarily want to spend 12 hours a day doing this in order to learn a skill. Like, you do need to space it out somewhat. And I think a lot of how you come at the project and how successful it is, with the definition of success being you're learning an extreme amount of information and an extreme skill in a very short time frame, and maintaining relationships. Like, that, to me, success in this ultra learning project would have both aspects tied to it. I think if you were to understand that going into it, it would have a very different feel than this is your one and only thing you're going to do. Like, I get where some people, because he tells stories of folks who wanted to learn a language and they go spend 3 or 4 months in Spain in order to pick up Spanish. Kudos to them. I think that's going too far. That's taking you to the point where you're abandoning all relationships in order to pursue your own internal goal. like that's very inward focused in that. This comes back to some of our complaints with the 4-hour work week. Like, it's very inward focus.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
It's not necessarily outward, but I think in this particular scenario, I don't think Scott would say that we're wrong in saying that. I think it's just all in what your intent is behind it, because I didn't really get that this has to be internal focused.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, did I misinterpret it?
I don't know. I mean, the definition that he uses of ultralearning in the next chapter is a strategy for acquiring skills and knowledge that is both self-directed and intense. The key thing that I get stuck on in the previous section is that the interests tend towards obsession. So when you're obsessed with something, like, nothing else matters. So the people who go to a country to learn a language in 3 months, I think that's fine. I don't necessarily think that act is inherently selfish or anything like that, but let's just paint a hypothetical here. Assuming you don't have somebody at home that's waiting for you, okay? You have the flexibility and the freedom to do that. You go to a new country and your objective is to learn this language. So every person that you talk to, the value that you're ascribing to them is as a tool to help you learn that language, correct?
That's fair, yeah.
So you go there, you meet somebody who is completely enamored with you, but you're just so obsessed with, I really don't even have time for that right now because I got to learn this language. Like, you're missing out. You're missing the main thing, right? So recognizing that the people in the relationships, that's the valuable thing, and that's the piece that's missing here, because it's by definition self-directed. There's nobody else involved with this. And if you're obsessive about it, this is dominating your time, it's dominating your attention, like nothing else, or at least everything else, is secondary to this. And I know, like, as he talks about how you can apply this, you can do it in small chunks, but that's kind of going against the picture that he's painting here at the beginning of, like, you just got to go hard on this thing for a short period of time, then you've got it, then you move on to the next thing. I don't know, that just doesn't seem appealing to me.
Yeah. No, I think I get your point. I think this is potentially a classic example of I'm trying to translate it into how I could use the information here. Mm-hmm. As opposed to taking it as he says it, like point blank. So this is where I think I'm coming at this from the stance of, yes, I'm okay, like, doing smaller pieces, because I do have some projects that I am going to apply some of these principles to. I still haven't figured out how to word it into an action item, so maybe by the time we're done here, I'll get it figured out.
All right.
But this is where I'm trying to extrapolate the principles, or his way of coming at this, because I think the core of what I picked up from the definition of ultralearning and the examples he gives of people who have done it is that if you want to learn a skill and you want to retain that and be extremely good at it, this is an excellent way to do that really fast. Now, do you have to do it really fast? No, of course not. Mm-hmm. Should you do it fast? That's your call. Like, it really depends on how quickly you need it for whatever your mission is, like whatever your intent or purpose is behind wanting to learn the skill. Like, I tell students this all the time who want to get into programming. Well, show me the apps that you're building. Like, if you want to get into programming, that's the way you need to do it. Because I talked to a high school student here just 2 days ago who is taking programming classes, and they're teaching Java. Like, I don't know anyone firsthand who is building applications in the real world on Java. Like, everyone is leaving Java from what I can tell, and they're still teaching it. So come at me if you're a programmer and you love Java, but I just don't understand why they continue to do that. So that's why I ask these students, like, what are you building? What is it you're doing in the real world? Because that is where you're going to learn all the nuances and the subtleties of that particular skill set. That's, I think, the mindset that I'm pulling out of this in order to apply it to what I do on a day-to-day basis, because I would love to take some of these ideas and potential skill sets and condense down the learning process on them so that I could become more proficient in them quicker. Like, I could see doing that in some cases. Like, I've wanted to pick up photography for a long time. I could see taking a lot of this methodology and using that in order to pick up photography at a higher level. Do I have the time to just say, I'm going to go make money at being a photographer and then dedicate 3 months to doing that? No, that's ridiculous to me. Like, I would not do that. But I would maybe spend 3 or 4 hours a week in 30 to 45 minute chunks working on it using this mindset. Like, I would definitely do that. But again, I'm simplifying it.
Yeah.
Which is what I tend to do, Mike.
Well, that's actually a good jumping off point for how to become an ultra learner. There's a couple different things that he mentions here in chapter 2 about why ultra learning matters. He has 3 cases where ultra learning new skills can apply, and that is accelerating the career that you have, transitioning to a new career, cultivating a hidden advantage in a competitive world. The thing that's missing from all of those is obviously the personal stuff, but he does say that you can apply ultra learning to either your personal life or your work life. There's a lot of reasons why ultra learning is important if you are looking to climb the corporate ladder or develop the skills that are going to set you apart from everybody else in the workplace. I think that's where a lot of the Cal Newport deep work stuff maybe comes into play. Ultra learning is the method that you can use if you want to get to the point in the quickest possible, the shortest possible path, to setting yourself apart from everybody else. Would be applying ultra learning. And there's 3 ways to do that, which there's new part-time projects like you were talking about where you're doing it in smaller chunks. He says that one, but I kind of feel like it's a concession, like he's got to throw it out there because he knows otherwise no one else will.
Sure.
Everybody who's working a 9 to 5 is going to be like, well, there's no way I can do this. But the other 2 are learning sabbaticals and then reimagining existing learning efforts. So if you are going to school for something, how can you create your own education system where you can develop those skills faster? I really like the idea of the learning sabbatical where you just take off 3 months to go to a country and learn a language. That's his kind of definition of a learning sabbatical.
Right.
Don't think that one applies to me. Remanaging existing learning efforts, probably not applying to me. New part-time projects, yeah, that one could apply to me. And it's interesting because some of the stories that he shares in here, kind of hit a chord with me. There's one in chapter 3 about actually how to become an ultra learner, where he mentions he did this test and there were 12 readers of his blog. One of them was this guy named Tristan Di Montebello, who decided to try and apply ultra learning to public speaking. And if I remember right, English was his second language. So he joined a Toastmasters group, and then 6 weeks after he joined was the deadline for competing for the World Championship of Public Speaking.
I'm pretty sure it was 2 weeks.
Maybe I typed that wrong.
It was pretty short. It was quick.
Yeah, he had to do 10 speeches in a couple of weeks, basically, in order to qualify to even compete in this World Championship of Public Speaking. Now, there's several different levels to this. I have competed in this. Not at the World Championship level, but there's the club level, and then I always get these mixed up. There's an area level and then a division level, I believe. And then from there, if you make it past the division level, that's where you're competing against everybody, and they pick the world champion. Which, by the way, a derivative of that is the humorous speech contest. I think I've told this story before. I entered the humorous speech contest because it was a skill I wanted to develop and I recognized I didn't have.
Sure.
And I ended up going as far as I could with that, which is a division level. There is no world championship of humorous for the humorous speech contest in Toastmasters.
Okay.
But the division level for the division I'm in is the entire state of Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan. So I lost in the finals of the humorous speech contest to a professional comedian. So did not feel bad about that. While I was there, I met the keynote speaker there was a guy named Aaron Beverly, and he actually did some coaching with me. And he recently, this last year, was the world champion of public speaking for Toastmasters.
Sure.
So that's pretty cool. I'll put a link to his speech in the show notes. Josh pointed that out to me. He's like, hey, didn't you used to work with Aaron Beverly? Yeah. And he's like, well, he won. Oh, that's cool.
I just looked it up. De Montebello showed up to his first Toastmasters meeting 10 days before the deadline to be eligible to compete in the World Championship of Public Speaking.
Wow. Yeah, so you were right, 2 weeks.
10 days. That's nuts.
Now, I cranked through, I thought, my speeches, and when you do those first 10 speeches, you get what's called a CC, a competent communicator. And then there's different levels after that, all the way up to distinguished Toastmaster, your DTM. That's kind of like the highest level you can have just from the accomplishments that you do in the club. And then there's like these contests too. But he wasn't really worried about achieving a certain level. He just wanted to do what he needed to do in order to compete. So he gave his 10 speeches, and then he qualified. Now, I understand how hard that is, because I did mine, and people thought I was flying through these in about 10 months. I basically did like one a month, which is difficult, especially for someone like me who tends to memorize their speeches.
Yeah.
But so I have a frame of reference here for what he actually did. And I was completely fine going through it in the period of 10 months. There is absolutely no way I would even attempt to do this in 10 days. That just seems stupid to me.
Yeah.
Like, good job, Tristan, but there's no way I'm going to do that.
I'll sit back and watch.
Well, here's the other thing, right? So he's competing, and I forget in the book they mentioned like what place he took. So he actually did do pretty well.
He made it into the top 10.
Top 10, that's right.
Yep.
And then from there, he started a coaching business with his mentor that he found in his Toastmasters group, and it kind of changed his professional life. I think that's kind of the impact story that Scott was going for there. It was like, look how this changed his life. But you're not completely changing your life every 10 days. Like, you got to pick the projects that are really important. And to me, I knew I wanted to develop my public speaking skills. So I applied myself and developed these skills. And me speaking into a microphone even right now is very different than me before I attended a Toastmasters meeting. I listen back to some of my old podcast episodes and hear all the ums and all the filler words, and I'm like, man, you're horrible. Of course, I know listeners hear that because I always edit those out.
Oh, of course you do.
But the live people know. So there we go. What I'm trying to wrap my head around here is like, is there something wrong with my approach? Because on the surface, I've kind of got the same goal. In fact, when I started working with Aaron Beverly, he asked me what my goal was. And I'm like, well, I want to compete at the world. I want to be a finalist in the World Championship of Public Speaking. I know you've gotten there. Like, you can help me get there. I'm willing to do the work, right? And then a bunch of work stuff happened, and we kind of lost touch, and I didn't have the time to do it, and trying to feed my family, all that kind of stuff, right? So life happened basically, and that got put on pause. But even before then, I was okay with developing the proficiency and the skills without getting the award. So while initially I wanted to, let's go for something big, right? What I realized as I progressed down that journey was that I achieved a level which, for the time being, was good enough. And with Ultralearning, I don't think there's any room for that, I guess, in the definition that Scott Young puts forth. Like, you're either doing this to achieve a certain level of mastery, or you are failing because you're not doing it fast enough. And the whole goal is to get to the finish line, put a bow on this one, and then go do it again somewhere else. And so my Toastmasters experience, I feel like through one perspective, is kind of aligns with this, but from another perspective is like a textbook case of how not to ultralearn.
Sure. Well, I think that there's a lot to come from this, and I get like some of the qualms that can come from trying to be an ultra learner, or the process of that. But let's dive into. He's got 9 principles here of ultra learning that help you in achieving the best possible way of learning a skill or knowledge at the best of your ability. That's essentially what this is. Now, his concept here is to condense it down, of course. But let's just kind of walk through these, Mike, and try to explain each one. But I don't want to spend a ton of time on these because it really is a whole methodology of following and just being aware of each of these principles. And then I want to know if you're going to do an Ultralearning project. That's ultimately what I want to know when we're all done with this.
All right.
So, principle number 1, meta-learning. Now, whenever you choose your project, because this all starts with you choose your project and you decide what your mission or your goal is for that. So with public speaking, like in Mike's case, making it to a finalist in the World Championship of Speaking. So if that's the goal, first what you'd have to do is figure out what are the metrics around that. What are the specific pieces of it? Basically, you're planning your project and learning what it is that you need to learn. So you have to start with a research base and learn about the thing you want to then learn in reality. Thus, meta-learning. You're learning about the learning process for that. Now, if you're into computer programming or want to learn computer programming, you would learn, like, what is a computer program? What does it look like? I even had some relatives at one point ask me, like, people talk about coding all the time. I don't even know what code looks like. What is code? Like, here, let me show you. Like, I've got it on my phone. Like, I will put it right here in front of you. Like, even that level can be helpful. But before you get anywhere, you have to learn what the mechanics are of the skill that you want to pick up before you ever jump in.
Yes. So as you were describing that, I was thinking back to Tim Ferriss and how he won the Chinese kickboxing championship.
By cheating?
Because he was meta-learning and he was doing the research prior to competing, and he found the loophole that he could exploit. Like,
right.
Finding the loopholes and exploiting them, I think, definitely fits into this definition of meta-learning, which doesn't necessarily leave a great taste in my mouth, but I think it's a good example of what he's saying, and you don't have to use it in a negative sense where you're trying to game the system, so to speak.
Right.
Really, it's like you said, doing the research before and after your Ultralearning project. So in the short term, and then in the long term, the more Ultralearning projects you do, the larger your set of general Ultralearning skills become, because you start to connect all these things and tie them all together. So this is something that probably a lot of people, and I think myself included, kind of struggle with, where you get an idea for, I want to do this thing, and then you just start doing it without really digging into what are all the moving pieces here. Now, I kind of think that's okay. You can start doing something and then realize that, well, actually, this thing in this form isn't what really moves the needle for me, but it does show me that this ancillary thing over here, that sounds really intriguing. I'm going to try that thing. I feel like without doing all the research, you can kind of experiment and make those connections if you're trying to find some stuff that really is fulfilling to you. In that sense, maybe you don't want to ultra learn.
Right.
Maybe you want to, I don't know what the opposite of that would be. Experiment. That's part of the process, though. So I don't know. But I just think, like, when it comes to the research prior to embarking on a project, you don't want to overthink it necessarily.
Right.
And that's what I tend to do.
Yep.
Is okay, so let me back up a little bit. I will either jump in with no clue of what I'm doing and just try some things, or I will sit there and research it to death. I have trouble reading this section on meta-learning and finding the point where, okay, this is enough research that now this is kind of like the optimal point for moving forward in learning this skill or embarking on this project in the most efficient way possible. That just doesn't seem to work for me.
Yeah, my wife does this. She researches to no end. And there are a lot of times I've told her, it's like, okay, here's the deal. You get 1 hour. I want a decision in 1 hour. Like,
yeah, and that's really the way to fix it. I mean, he does give you a rule of thumb that if you're going to spend a budget of so many hours on this thing, you should invest about 10% of your expected learning time doing the research prior to jumping in.
Right.
And then you do continue to do the research as you learn, But at that point, there's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
So you're not doing as much of it.
So principle number 2, focus, sharpen your knife. When you think about it, whenever you start your project, whenever you have your sessions, when you're doing your ultra learning, you essentially need hyperfocus to stay on task.
Yep.
Essentially what I came away from this is a summarized version of how you should do deep work. Obviously, Scott Young is a fan of Cal Newport, and this is kind of a quick and dirty tips and tricks for beat procrastination, avoid distraction, stay focused on your task. That's what this is.
Yes. So this section, I've got really 2 different breakdowns in my MindNode file. One is the 3 problems of focus: failing to start focusing, failing to sustain focus, failing to create the right kind of focus. And then he's got tactics that go along with each one of those. If you have read anything in the productivity space in the last 10 years, you already know what's in there.
Yes.
The other section is how you can develop your ability to focus. This is interesting to me because the 2 things he really says here are recognize where you are and start there. And I quote, start small and slowly increase. So apparently you can't ultra learn the ability to focus.
That's a fascinating point. Didn't catch that one. Well done, Mike. Did you just find a loophole in the whole ultra learning process?
Well, I don't know. I do admit that as soon as I read that, I'm like, okay, so this is very different than all the other advice that you've given us. And yeah, it's a little bit different because this is like, there's physiological stuff going on here that you really can't control. You're not going to go to the gym and ultra learn the ability to bench press 400 pounds either. You know, there are certain limitations there, but when it comes to your brain, it's kind of like those all get chucked, like they don't really matter.
Sure.
And I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, that maybe your brain is a phenomenal supercomputer that can move a little bit faster than other things that you might imagine. Like if you were to chart growth physically from going to the gym and mentally from ultra learning, that curve probably is quite a bit higher because of the neuroplasticity and stuff like that. But there are, I believe, limits there, which come out in the advice that he gives you right here.
Sure.
So the whole idea of ultra learning then does have to be framed of there are places where this works and places where it doesn't. And I don't think that's necessarily a knock against ultra learning, but it also opens up the argument of, well, maybe ultra learning isn't the right thing here. Insert whatever arena you might be considering applying this to.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know. I think the focus piece here is helpful. Like I get that. But again, it's a muscle that you need to build up over time. I like your point about like you can't just go ultra learn how to lift 400 pounds on the bench, but you also can't go ultra learn how to stay focused for 6 hours straight. Like that's just not going to happen without a long period of time and building up that muscle. So there is a bit of a physical and physiological barrier here, but he does call out meditation here, Mike.
He does.
Of course, I noticed that. Still on my current trajectory of meditating regularly. So,
and you're using Oak, correct?
I'm not. I'm using 10% Happier.
Are you? So did you subscribe?
I did. That's how I got myself
right
to do it.
This is interesting.
I figured if I put money towards it, I would actually follow through.
Okay, this is a tangent now, but did you play with like Headspace or Calm or any of the more major ones?
I used to be a Calm user. Way back when I first tried it, I was on Calm, and then they moved to a subscription model that was like $40, $50 a year or something like that.
Yep.
And in my mind, that was ridiculous.
Currently it's $60.
Is it? Okay. Maybe that was the discount price because I was a part of their system before that. but then I played around with Oak for a while, but then it's like, well, I like Oak, but I kind of wanted some of the guided stuff. So I looked at Headspace. For some reason, I just didn't like it. And I figured, well, if anything, I'm going to give 10% Happier a try. And I liked it. So they at least have a trial that I could play around with it before I jump in. But I like that one.
Well, it's interesting. I'm experimenting with all of these for an article that's going to come out on the Sweet Setup at some point.
Yeah.
So literally this week, I've downloaded all of these and gone through. They basically all have a trial now.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's in iOS 13. Some of them you can use the sign in with Apple things, so you can keep your email private if you want to cancel it.
And I know 10% Happier does that now too.
Yep, 10% Happier definitely has the best design. It supports the native dark mode. It looks great, but it's also the most expensive. It's $100 a year.
Yes, it is.
And even Headspace now is, I think, the same price as Calm, or very similar. It's either $60 or $70 a year. It used to be like one of those, you get 40% off the first year, then it recurs at like $130 a year.
Right.
And that's not the case anymore. It seems like the market for meditation apps has kind of leveled out to about that $50, $60 a year.
I will say this. The 10% Happier, like a lot of like Headspace and such, like they have these guided lessons, if you will, as either part of or before the meditation itself. And the 10% Happier lessons really resonated with me.
Okay.
Like they, for whatever reason, the way that they are explaining things, because they do kind of like an interview process with a couple folks before the actual guided meditation to teach you the purpose of that meditation before you do it. That to me was gold. Like that's what sold me on it.
Yeah, those are cool.
So anyway, let's move past focus. Principle number 3, directness. The easiest way I can think to explain this is with an example. And it might be a dig on you in the process, Mike.
All right.
Apologies before I get there.
Yeah, let's do it.
Directness. If you want to learn a language, taking yourself to an area where people speak that language is the most direct way that you can learn that. Like putting yourself in the scenario where you are actually using those skills all day long, every day. Another example of this would be like if you wanted to learn to do programming, like what I mentioned earlier, go build software. Like that's what you would do. That would be the direct route. With the language piece, he actually in this book on page 90, because I wrote it down, he actually has a dig on Duolingo.
He does.
Of how Duolingo uses gamification of sorts in order to help you memorize things, but it doesn't allow you to fully engage with the language in its entirety. And I know that Duolingo is your primary way of learning a second language at the moment, so I'm curious what your thoughts were on this particular chapter.
Yes. Okay. So the quote that I wrote down in this section on Duolingo, because I definitely wanted to talk about this too. He says, it provides English words and sentences and then asks you to pick words from a word bank to translate them. That is the description that he gives for Duolingo, which is, in my experience, limited experience, admittedly, as a Duolingo user, that is the surface level of the app. So the way that it's broken down, there's basically like a knowledge tree that you work your way down from top to bottom. It gets progressively harder, and there's built-in checkpoints. And to move your way down the tree, you have to complete level 1 in each of these little areas. But there are up to 5 levels in each of those areas. So you can complete level 1 and get exactly what he's describing. When you get to level 4, you're hearing the words being spoken in English or Spanish, and then you're typing out the sentence. So I don't really think that's fair. And he does say in the footnote, in fairness to Duolingo, there are ways of using the app to get more direct forms of practice, but these tend to come only from repeatedly practicing the same lessons on the mobile version of the app. Not exactly true, Scott. If you're not just trying to fly through it to say, there, I did it, then you're going to experience this the right way. But I do also, in fairness to him, see how he got to the conclusion that he did. My opinion on this is that Duolingo is not built for ultralearning, and that's the way I like it.
Nice. All right. I was curious because he really did rip on it for quite a while, so that's why I was asking.
He did. Now, also keep in mind, my goal is not to become fluent in Spanish and achieve a certain level. He talks about this. I forget what the language tests were that he mentioned, but there are tests that you can take, and there's 2 levels at the very top, and he was always shooting for at least the 2nd level when he was trying to learn a language.
That was his friend who learned like 18 languages.
Yep. And then he basically was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I'm going to do it that way.
Yeah.
And that's not what I'm trying to do.
Sure.
Number one, I don't know when I'm going to go to a Spanish-speaking country again, or if I'm going to go to a Spanish-speaking country again.
Yeah.
I probably will at some point, but the goal is not to, by the time I get there, to be fluent and be able to speak Spanish and converse with people whenever I get there. It's just that I recognize that I have removed a bunch of things which are time wasters on my phone, but the most effective way to break those bad habits and create new ones is to replace that with something else. So I'm going to put something that, to me, Duolingo is entertaining, and I'm learning something along the way. So that's going to have a whole bunch of ancillary benefits, not necessarily just associated with learning the language itself, not for checking the box, but just causing my brain to have more dots to connect, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
So that's really my objective here. And Scott Young would be like, well, that's dumb.
Yep.
Right. So different goals here, but I do want to share this because I was looking at this the other day. I'm going to post this in the live chat.
Ooh.
I found a link, and this is admittedly on the Duolingo forum, but it links to a study, which was an external study, which was started to chart the effectiveness of a tool like Rosetta Stone. And they found that if you buy Rosetta Stone and you practice 55 hours in Rosetta Stone, that's essentially the equivalent of 1 semester of college.
Okay.
Duolingo is completely free. Yes, there is a plus plan you can buy, but you can go through the whole thing for free and just watching the occasional ad. Duolingo takes 34 hours to achieve the equivalent of a semester of college. So I am happy to pick away at that 34 hours, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, rather than get a plan and put my life on hold so that I can learn a language. And again, different strokes for different folks. Like, my situation is different than Scott's. I'm not going to walk away from my family for that length of time. Maybe he doesn't have those things holding him down. Maybe that is honestly the better option for somebody like him. But I don't know. I thought the whole description of Duolingo here kind of showed a certain level of ignorance of the product. Like, I personally would not have said what he said about Duolingo, because even for somebody like me who hasn't been using it super long, I think I sent you a screenshot. It's like 52 days in a row or something like that now.
Right.
So I'm no expert in Duolingo, but I've been using it consistently, and I can spot the holes in his arguments. And what that does is destroy credibility, right or wrong. You know, not only is he attacking one of my preferred applications on my phone at the moment, you know, so there's a little bit of defensiveness right there. But when you can see what he's saying, and it's a very brief section, he doesn't unpack this all the way, right? He's just throwing something out there, and then you're like, well, you don't understand this. Maybe he does understand this, you know, but he doesn't. The way he phrased it makes it seem like he doesn't completely understand it.
Sure.
And at that point, you're like, well,
you done lost me.
Exactly. And I feel like there's so much in here, and there's so many different topics that he touches on, where they're a page, 2 pages, they could be entire books. It's very dangerous to try to summarize all of that stuff into just a couple of sentences or a couple of paragraphs. You've really got to be skilled in doing that, or you're going to ostracize some people like me.
Sure. Well, I'll take your word for it because I have no clue. But the thing I do know is that the easiest way to learn a skill and to learn it really well is be very direct about it.
Yep.
I'll pull us back onto the outline here.
I've got one other thing here for directness.
Oh, yeah? You got more? Okay.
Yeah. So I have worked for many years with a family business that sold software to special education, specifically special education programs in schools. And we have worked with programs that teach students with moderate to severe needs, which at that point, they're sometimes nonverbal, but a lot of times like can't read, and you're focusing on life skills, independent living skills. So for many years, the family business has had a product called the Functional Skills System, where we will shoot live action video. Basically, as soon as digital video was a thing, we were doing this. We would shoot live video of the correct way to perform a social skill in a specific situation, or even just like basic sign and word recognition, so that when somebody is at school and they can't read, they can still function independently because they know which is the boys' restroom and which is the girls' restroom because they recognize the signs. Make sense?
It does.
Okay. The interesting thing about this, because this has been effective for a very long time, specifically with students with autism, this has kind of become the de facto way to develop these skills with people, is this concept of video modeling. So teachers in special education programs know this stuff works. They know they can get these videos, and that means that they don't have to physically take the person to a job situation and put them in have them experience your boss asking you to come in on a Saturday when you don't want to. And, if you can show them the correct behavior, they can generalize that and they can apply that to their situation. All right. So that's really the transfer that he's talking about in this directness chapter, where you learn something in one context and you transfer it to another. And he talks about how this is a big problem in education. So this whole idea of video modeling is interesting to me. And he didn't really touch on video modeling here, which I was kind of surprised that he didn't, because I think this is one of the most effective vehicles that anybody can use to transfer knowledge. A lot of athletes use the concept of video modeling. Michael Phelps famously, he'll not only watch video of the right way to do things, he'll rehearse it in his head. There's kind of a famous story of his coach before he jumps in the pool. He's like, put in the videotape. And he's playing through in his head, this mental rehearsal visualization, basically. That's kind of at the heart of this video modeling concept. He's visualizing himself in everything he's going to do the entire race, and then he just goes out and does it. He doesn't have to think about it in the moment because he's seen it and he's rehearsed it mentally so many times. And there's a really interesting study about this, which it's kind of hard to find out exactly where this was done. There's a couple different places it's attributed to. The most popular one, I think, is University of Chicago. And just trying to summarize this real quickly, they took 3 groups of students, and they were all basketball players. For 30 days, the first group practiced shooting free throws for an hour a day. The second group did not touch a basketball, but they visualized themselves taking and making free throws every single day. And the third group did nothing. So after 30 days, the difference, I forget the specific numbers, I think it was like 28% improvement for the ones that actually did it. And there was only a 1% difference for the ones that practiced mental rehearsal visualization. It was like 27%. I may be screwing up those numbers, but the basic idea is that it was essentially the same without physically doing the thing, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, right?
Sure.
But that's what a lot of really successful athletes do, is they'll video themselves doing something, and then they'll just kind of redo that over and over and over and over and over again in their head. So I wanted to call that out in this directness chapter, because I think depending on the skill that you're trying to develop, obviously learning vocabulary you can't apply video modeling to, but pretty much anything physical, this is a tool that you should definitely be using.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, principle 4, drill. Attack your weakest point. I don't really have a lot to say here other than once you're learning your skills, you have to come up with ways to test yourself and make sure that you understand things. Like if you go into like the world of blogging, drilling yourself might be releasing blog posts because they're kind of small tests to see how they work and get some of the feedback, which is a later principle here we'll get to soon. Like that concept of drilling yourself in order to continually improve is what you need to be doing.
Yeah, there's one key concept, I think, which is worth calling out here, the rate determining step. The story that he uses to illustrate this is kind of interesting. By the way, each one of these principles, he does open up with a story. Some of the stories we've heard before, some of them were new. This one on Benjamin Franklin at the beginning of this chapter was interesting because Benjamin Franklin, the success that he had was because he was a great writer. It was a skill that helped him in all of his other professional endeavors. But the way that he became a good writer was that his father pointed out his arguments weren't very good when he was engaged in a debate for the education of women. And he's like, well, I'm going to fix that. So he focused first on the mechanics of writing, then he moved on to vocabulary and then style that would be persuasive. So this skill has provided benefit to him in all these different areas, but he had to recognize that there was this thing that was holding him back, and then he attacked that thing. And then that thing changed as he developed those skills, but recognizing the rate determining step actually in chemistry, this is like the bottleneck. It's the slowest part in the chain reaction. And Scott Young is saying that the same thing happens in learning. So what you should do is you should pick that rate limiting step and you should drill on it over and over and over and over and over again. I think the easy application example of this would be something like a musician. So I grew up playing Suzuki violin, classically trained. I could play the Four Seasons by the time I was 12, but I couldn't sit down and jam with somebody because this is kind of how I was taught was you listen to this thing and you find this tough piece and then or this tough section in the piece, and then you play it slowly. And then you play it faster and you play it faster and you play it faster until you're doing it at normal speed. And you play that one section maybe 100 times before you can actually play it without thinking about it. So I have an example of this from my childhood that I can fall back on, but I can't think of another one where I would actually want to apply this. So sure. Can you help me out? You have anything?
Well, that's why I brought up the blogging thing, because that's kind of where I do that. Maybe newsletter too, but like publishing things and actually releasing things is a form of a drill in my mind. So anytime I'm releasing...
Is there a rate determining step in there?
Not really.
Yeah, exactly. I can't find another one. I'm sure they're there, but I don't know. Like this whole chapter on this principle is kind of like, look for this thing and then fix this thing.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, nah, I'll just write. I'll just publish.
I'll do it the old school way.
Yeah.
I'm in this one for the long haul. I'm not trying to do it quickly. And, maybe that's an argument against the whole doing it quick thing because Benjamin Franklin, which is his example, he did that over decades. Like his writing process was not one that he perfected in a short amount of time and then just kept doing it. Like he spent a long time writing. So how much of that was because he did the drills and how much of that was because he just wrote a lot and published a lot? Who knows? Maybe a little bit of both.
So I think drilling does have some value. If I were to summarize this, though, and kind of put it in terms for just about anybody can apply this, I would say forget the thing on the rate determining step for the most part. If you can really identify that, if it's really obvious, go for it. But otherwise, just be intentional about drilling, intentional practice. It kind of comes back to the Anders Ericsson book, Peak, that we read a while back. In fact, Scott Young mentions Anders Ericsson in that book specifically several times throughout this. The deliberate practice is really the thing. You don't have to pick your weakest thing and make sure that this is the bottleneck and that's the thing that you should be focusing on every time you sit down to practice or drill, I would argue.
Sure. All right, principle number 5, retrieval, test to learn. In other words, test yourself and figure out where you're at in the process. But it's very important that your mechanism for retrieving the information or testing yourself is done in a very certain way. Now, think about how you go about doing final exams and in college with cramming last minute. Like you're trying to go over things quickly beforehand. It's like one of the worst ways you can prepare for a final exam.
Right.
Another way of doing this is to rewrite the questions in a way that you're forced to come up with the answers, but you don't really have the facts in front of you to review them. That's kind of a second, but you're still using material to get those questions. The third way here, and the one that he highly recommends, and that the one where his story comes from, is where you just try to write down what the answers are, or even what the process is, like what the methodology is. Like you're trying to get this out of you without prompts. And that is by far the best way to retrieve information. Now, the story that he tells here is about a man named Srinivasa Ramanujan from India, who was an amazing mathematician. And he had one book that had some equations in it, but it didn't explain where the equations came from. So he was trying to, without having the information of where these equations came from, was manufacturing how to come up with this in his own ways, having no training whatsoever in mathematics. And he was discovered because he sent some of his proofs solving these renowned problems that no one could solve. He had solutions to them, and he sent them to people. I forget the college. It was an Ivy League school that he sent them to. And they this seems right, but his mechanism for getting there is just so weird that they couldn't explain it. If you want to know more about that story, there's actually a movie on Netflix about it. And I've actually seen this. It's actually a pretty good film. So whenever they mentioned Ramanujan in the book, when Scott mentioned him, it's like, oh, I know this story. So some of what I just told you, I think I may have given more than what was in the book. But if you want to know more about it, The Man Who Knew Infinity, it's on Netflix. Go watch it.
All right. I don't have a whole lot else to add to this section other than the desirable difficulty thing. He talks about how there's a certain level of hardness that helps things stick, and low-intensity learning strategies usually involve either less or easier retrieval, so they don't stick as long. I think there's some truth to that. Like, you should do hard things. That kind of comes back to the discussion on Grit that we had, the book by Angela Duckworth. But I also don't think you have to apply ultra learning to something that is hard necessarily.
Sure. To
get the benefit from doing the hard thing. Like, I think these are two separate concepts here. They're not tied together. I think the process of ultra learning combined with desirable difficulty produces something like cramming. In fact, he says in this section, the quicker you test yourself after learning something, the more you're going to retain. Anybody who has ever stayed up the night before a test to cram and then passed the exam recognizes that that helps you in the short term, but in the long term, maybe not so much.
Right.
So I don't know exactly. He does kind of say later on that cramming is really not the right approach here. But in this section on desirable difficulty, it sounds like the goal being to pass a test. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
And I don't know. Another example of how you can manipulate the system, I think, to achieve a desired outcome. But holistically, that doesn't really jive with sustainability, and not just in terms of retaining the information and being able to retrieve it later, but just, are you going to be alive when you're 60 years old if you continue to try all these different ultra learning projects? I think these got to be spaced out. You gotta pick and choose these, and probably the more sustainable long term thing is to not ultra learn, but to go at your own pace.
All right. Well, the next principle is feedback, which
I like this one.
This one I get. If you're going to continue to learn things, you really got to have good feedback mechanisms that tell you if you're doing better or if you're learning what you actually set out to learn. This is one that just, it's what you would think it is. Like, you need feedback to know if you're progressing or not. I don't really have anything else other to say than that.
This one, I'm trying to find this in my Amazon orders, but I read a book not too long ago. It was not, I think, a Gap book, but it was something that somebody in my mastermind group told me about. And it was essentially how to give and receive feedback. If I find it, I'll put the link in the show notes here.
Okay.
But I do think this whole idea of feedback, this is really interesting. And again, I've got a whole book on this that he's trying to condense it down into a couple of pages. It's Thanks for the Feedback by Douglas Stone, The Science and Art of Receiving Feedback Well. So I think that this chapter specifically, he mentions outcome feedback, information feedback, creative or corrective feedback. I think there's a lot of gold here. The outcome feedback, the question this is really trying to answer is, are you doing it wrong? It's going to tell you something about how you're doing, but it's not going to offer you any ideas as to what you're doing better or worse. It comes in the form of a grade, like a C on a report card. This is the easiest type of feedback to get, but it's not that useful. The next one up is information feedback, where you find out what you're doing wrong. So it shows you what you need to fix, but it doesn't tell you how to fix it. The example he uses here is like a blank stare from somebody you're trying to communicate with in another language. And then there's corrective feedback, which is how can you fix what you're doing wrong? And this is typically available through a coach, mentor, or teacher. This requires someone who can pinpoint your mistakes and correct them for you. This is the highest level of feedback, but requires a correct answer from somebody who knows what they're talking about. And this is where something like a mastermind group really is valuable, in my opinion. He talks in this section about the problem of giving and receiving feedback, being that sometimes people will receive it wrong. They may say, I want to know the truth, but you tell them the truth and they get offended because you're attacking them in their minds, even though what you're trying to do is attack the wrong behavior, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
So this is something that I think everybody should meditate on this for a little bit and think about how they can apply this to their life. I feel like if you understand the sources that you're receiving feedback from, and you recognize whether they're any good, and also grading your what type, like the quality of the feedback that you are getting from those sources. And if you're getting feedback from not high quality sources, changing some of those sources, and then also being able to disassociate any corrective feedback that you might get from an attack on your character, that is one of the quickest ways to see positive improvement in your life, because you will quickly see the things that you're doing wrong. Sometimes you'll have people who will give you a prescriptive plan for fixing those things. Other times, just recognizing that the thing is wrong, like that's enough to correct it. Going all the way back to the beginning of the episode where I was sharing my failures about, I'm trying to make all this stuff work. I recognized just because somebody had pointed out, hey, you're doing this wrong. I'm like, you're right. I'm doing it wrong again. I already know what to do to fix it, right? I just get so caught up in the default that it takes one of those outside perspectives to kind of put my focus back where it should be.
Sure. So principle number 7, retention. How do you hold on to all this stuff you're learning? And there's some science that goes into this, but the core of what I came away from this, because I'm extrapolating out a little bit here, in that maybe this is where I've got some of the transfer from other things. To me, whenever it comes to retaining information, it has to do with connecting it to existing information in some form, whether it's a song, whether it's artwork, whether it's programming concepts. It could be mathematical number patterns I use a lot. I don't know why number patterns work for me, but the whole concept to me is that you need to connect the new information with something that's existing. And Mike, you have a note here on sketchnoting, which I'm sure plays into this wholeheartedly.
For me, it does. Again, this is not something that I would say I have learned or developed because #ultralearning, but sure. I've been sketchnoting for a couple of years now, and it really has helped me. And it kind of ties back. The reason I got into this is I came across this study, which I will again put in the chat here for the people who are listening live. This is an Oppenheimer and Mueller study, I believe. The pen is mightier than the keyboard. The gist of this study says that students who took notes by hand tend to retain more information than those who took notes with a computer, because the people who typed their notes could keep up word for word, but all they ended up with was an exact copy of what people were saying. Whereas when you're taking notes by hand, you can't keep up. So you have to synthesize this stuff. And that helps you retain the information. So for sketchnoting, for me, it does that to the nth degree, because not only am I not able to keep up with the words, I am taking those words and I am formulating them into a picture. And then that picture that I create, that is something that gets imprinted in my brain. And I've had this happen over and over and over again, where I've captured something via sketchnote, has nothing to do with the quality of the drawing that I create. I don't really think I'm that much of an artist, to tell you the truth. There's a lot of people who can do sketchnoting a lot better than I can. In fact, Mike Rohde, the sketchnote guy, was recently on an episode of Focused. So we'll put that in the show notes too. But I think that this is something that you can do to retain more information, which again doesn't necessarily jive with Ultralearning necessarily. But I do think that it is a form of the memory mechanism number 4, where he talks about how to prevent forgetting, where it's kind of like a mnemonic. He says that the keyword method is something that he uses to take a foreign language and convert it into something that sounds familiar. And that's kind of how he remembers these things. So sketchnoting takes these ideas, which may be new, and you create a picture based off of things that you already know, kind of to your point, and then that helps it stick, regardless of how artistic you are.
Nice point. All right, let's get through these last two. Principle number 8, intuition. I have to say this is the one where his explanation I really struggled with. Like the rest of these I can see, yep, get that one, tick. Got that one, check. But this one, I think I followed what he was saying, but all I came away from this with was develop experience and intuition will follow. Like that's really all I came out of it with. And I'm still not even sure that that's his point in this. So did you get this one?
Yeah. So the point he's trying to make is that people who are intuitive problem solvers solve problems differently. They use a principles first way of thinking, whereas beginners will look at the superficial features of the problem. And I don't have a great example of that, but basically the more you develop your skill and intuition, you're able to see the connections of like things, and it's not always surface level. Like sometimes you have to dig a little bit deeper. The one example I think where you can kind of wrap your head around this maybe is the idea with like the chess grandmasters. They showed that somebody who is a chess grandmaster can memorize much more of the pieces on the board than a beginner can, but when the pieces are just placed randomly, like they would never be in an actual game, then they are just as bad as the beginners at recreating that scenario, because they've played enough chess to create all of these mental patterns in their head. So they just flip through those mental patterns and they piece them together when they recreate the setting on the chessboard. And it's kind of like the guy from Peak, where he was learning to memorize all of the numbers. Same sort of thing. He's not trying to memorize all the individual numbers. He's memorizing the patterns. I don't think there's a very clear, for me anyways, process to developing intuition by memorizing patterns in specific situations. The one thing I can think of is, as a guitar player, kind of like the fretboard patterns and the fingerings and things, scales basically for the different keys and stuff like that. I don't have a action item with that though. Like there's nothing I'm going to do differently about learning scales. I'm just going to play the scales in my book. I'm not going to apply Ultralearning to this and say, okay, this pattern plus this pattern plus this pattern. I'm just going to do it and I'm not going to do it super fast. I'm going to do it over time, and it's going to provide the benefit I'm looking for. So,
well, my experience is like, I feel like I've tried to build up a lot of intuition over my work life, especially. And I've been very intentional about how do I develop intuition in different areas. And I find that personally, the way that I do that is actually from his 9th principle, experimentation, explore outside your comfort zone. Like, to me, what I've found is like, okay, if I'm going to learn how to build a Rails application, the best way for me to do that, one, is to actually do it, but then to play around with it and figure out how it works. And then as I've done that, I learn a bunch of ways that it does work and a bunch of ways that it doesn't, which means that whenever I come to it again in the future, my intuition then tells me how I should be coming at it in a different way. Or like whenever someone asks me, how would you do X? Well, my gut tells me to do it this way. Whether I've done it or not doesn't matter, but my gut tells me to do it this way because I've done so many things around it and I've experimented with things in so many different ways that I can get there very quickly. So that's ultimately what I landed on. So like to me, those two should almost be lumped together, but he broke them apart, so we talk about them apart. But all that to say, Principle 9, experiment, get outside your comfort zone, try new things, play and have fun.
Yeah, and if I were to recreate this book based on my own system, this is the one that I would start with. Is experiment. Yeah. But he puts it at the end. And the reason that he does that is, I think for Ultralearning, you start off with a very specific goal. And so experimentation at this point in the process really is just tucking in the corners of the thing that you have decided to focus on. Whereas I think it's valuable at the beginning of the process because when you start a project, you don't know, a learning project, let's say, you don't know what you want this project necessarily to look like 6 months, six years from now. And he would say it doesn't matter because in 3 months you're going to be done and you're moving on to the next one. So I get it, how he applies it here. But again, my advice would be do this at the beginning.
Yeah.
Learn all the things you don't know, or at least experience all the things that you don't know, because there may be something in there that you really enjoy. Going back to my rock climbing story from the last episode.
Yes.
Right? Had I not been forced to experiment, I never would have realized that I actually enjoy that quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I'm going to radically change my day-to-day, but it could. And I think that's where doing it at the beginning of the process has the most value, is you may stumble upon something that you had no idea it wasn't even on your radar. And you're like, oh my gosh, this thing is amazing.
Right.
That's kind of how I got to where I am with a lot of the stuff that I do. I started writing. I wasn't a writer. I started speaking. I wasn't a speaker. I started podcasting. Like none of these things were on the radar at the beginning. And it was experimentation that kind of helped me find these things that really move the needle for me.
Sure. Well, after he goes through these 9 principles, so again, those are meta learning, focus, directness, drill, retrieval, feedback, retention, intuition, and experimentation. Once he goes through those 9, he then gets into your first Ultralearning project, which at this point, we're very well aware that Mike is going to be 100% on board with picking out an Ultralearning project.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm quite certain.
I'm going to do my research. I'm going to schedule my time. I'm going to execute my plan, review my results, and then choose to maintain or master what I've learned. That's exactly what I'm going to do.
Okay, sure. Basically, I saw this as a pep talk. That's the way I saw it.
What's fascinating about this chapter is he actually talks about alternate strategies here. Low intensity habits. In my mind file, I put, this is my preference, which works well when the learning is spontaneous. There's a low frustration level and the learning itself is automatically rewarding. That's what I'm trying to do with Duolingo and learning Spanish. Like there's nothing goal oriented attached to that whole practice for me. It's just the act of doing it that's rewarding for me. So I don't know. That's again, a page or two, but I feel like maybe at the end, it's almost like a concession.
Sure.
Where here's Ultralearning. By the way, this isn't going to work all the time, so here's some other stuff.
Yeah.
But really, Ultralearning.
Right. I think if I'm going to do anything, I don't think I'm going to devote as much to this and have it in a short time frame like what he calls for. But I am going to be trying to up my game with photography. primarily iPhone photography because I ain't spending money on it yet. Like maybe at some point I'll pick up a whole DSLR, but until that time, my phone will do just fine. And I've already kind of been pursuing that to some degree, but I'm grateful for having read this because there are a number of these principles that I want to apply to that.
Yep.
In a small way here or there. I didn't mean to jump into action items here, but that's, if I'm going to be doing anything, that's what it's going to be. Most of this in my mind is just a great thing to learn. I guess this is maybe a meta learning thing. Like the book itself is a meta learning process, just to like, what does the learning process look like? And how does that compare to, say, the school system? How is this different? Like that to me was the big part. I should note the last chapter in the book is called An Unconventional Education. And we've talked about the Polgar sisters before, the ones who Dad taught them chess from the time they were like -6 days old, and he trained them up to be chess champions, and to this day they are phenomenal. Like that story is one that he tells. It was kind of hard for me to read it because I felt like I've been told this story I don't know how many times now. How many books have we had this story in? So it came out yet again, and I kind of...
Interesting details with it, though.
Yeah, I mean, there are some more pieces to it that I didn't know beforehand, but I kind of got the impression that he was making a call for the opposite of what we read in Range, like trying to become a generalist. Like he's calling for people to become experts and specialists. It's like, no, that's not right. Like that's what I was screaming in my head at the book, as introverts do. And this was something I was like, not doing this.
He even has a section on how to raise an ultra learner, and the steps are: start early, specialize, make practice into play, positive reinforcement, and don't coerce learning.
Yep.
But as soon as I read specialize, I immediately thought of Range too.
Yep. It was hard to ignore at that point. So I will not be doing that. I will likely try to use some of the principles and deep dive in a wide variety of areas, but I'm not going to focus on one, especially not in my kids.
Agreed.
Do you have any action items? What are you going to ultra learn?
I really wanted to have an action item, but I can't. I mean, we went through this point by point for the different principles. I kind of thought we were going to just skip over a bunch of them, but as we talked about it, I realized that I basically was saying, this is what he says, but this is what I think for every single one of these.
Yep.
So I think I disagree with a lot of this book. I think, Scott, well, actually, before we move on, do you have any action items?
Well, I'm just going to do the photography thing, like trying to apply principles to that. Maybe that'll come out on my Instagram feed. So if you really want to go see some of those experiments, I'm Joe Bulig there, like I am everywhere else. But that's likely the only thing I'm going to be doing, but not really anything beyond that. To me, it's mostly a book of, this is kind of cool information to know and just be aware of. I don't think I'm actually going to go through with this.
Right. Okay. So style and rating, since I kind of started on that anyways, I'll go first. The majority of this book, I found myself trying to understand what he said and then immediately being defensive and stating it in a different way of how I think it actually works. That being said, I think the method that he uses can be effective. You kind of can't argue with the results that he's been able to achieve with like the MIT challenge. I just hear him doing that and I'm like, why would anyone do that? Again, my situation versus his probably, where I just can't figure out how and why I would want to go so hard on some stuff that really doesn't matter to me. That's the thing. I don't see a direct path forward to applying ultra learning on any specific skill for me at the present. But I do think that some of the stuff that he talks about is valuable. I do think you kind of have to spit out the sticks. You have to recognize that he's trying to condense a ton of principles into a simple system. And to be honest, I don't think it really works. I think that he's trying to be brief, and that works against him sometimes. I have no doubt that he is a brilliant guy. He's got to be if he's hanging out with James Clear and Cal Newport. But kind of when I saw this recommended and I saw that James Clear had written the introduction, I'm like, oh, this book's going to be awesome. I kind of feel after reading this that my opinion of James Clear is kind of taken a hit.
Wow.
from this book.
That's quite a statement.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a lot of stuff in here, like Duolingo thing specifically, where it's like, oh, you don't really know what you're talking about here. Maybe you ultra learned Duolingo and it wasn't effective, so you don't really understand it, and which is why you're saying these things that aren't necessarily true. And again, totally opinionated. I could be wrong. I recognize that, but this is what people sign up to hear, right? Is the opinions. So having read this, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I'm not going to try and teach ultra learning to my kids or really encourage it, I think, in anybody else that I come in contact with. I don't have an ultra learning project that I want to work on right now. I'm happy to pick away at my Spanish and develop positive habits. I don't know. I do think that the stories at the beginning of the chapters are good. I think that he is a decent writer. I will say that it's not really my cup of tea how he wrote it. It felt very formulaic. Almost every single chapter is story, principle, tactics. And some of the connections I thought were a bit of a stretch. Some of the tactics I felt were just grabbing the stuff that was fairly easy. And I don't know, like a lot of the tactics, I read them, I jotted them down, and I really didn't think they were all that valuable, which is not what I expected from this book. I really kind of thought this was going to blow me away, but did not have that effect. I do think there's some good stuff in here. I'm not going to necessarily recommend this to anybody, but I'm going to put it at a 3.0. It's a good book. It's not one that I'm looking to reread at any point in the foreseeable future.
Okay. Well, I'm going to contradict you on this to some degree in that I think, so for example, I've read Scott Young's blog for a while, so this is not my first interaction with him, and he has some intense blog articles that he puts out. They are very long whenever he does these. He just put out one on the complete guide to self-control. Like, he's very good at deep diving things. It's kind of what he does. And I think this is another case of that, where he deep dives the deep diving process, which is where this comes from. Like, he's basically explaining his own learning process.
He's meta-learning.
Yeah, totally. And I think that this is a system, like, I've got a couple things right now that I could see applying this to. One is in the process of building a business around a web application. Like, what is that process? I could see deep diving that right now because I've got a piece of software that I'm about ready to launch in the next few weeks. It's very specialized, so it won't be available for most people. But like that thing, I could see applying this to. I could see applying it to the photography. Like, I've got a handful of these that I could see doing this with. I just don't know how it fits into my scheduling because I'm already saying yes to too many things and need to say no more often. And I feel like saying yes to this is just adding, it's putting too much on me right now. So as much as I would love to say, yeah, I'm going to go do an ultra learning project, because I think that there is a lot of potential in this process, I don't think I would follow it to the letter. Most of the times whenever I see something like this, like, okay, I get your beginning point, do the planning process and then get going. And I get your plan and then try to follow it. And the rest of these pieces are just like little tidbits to be aware of as you go through it. Like, I'm not going to follow it to the letter, but the principle behind it, behind all the principles, is one that I could see jumping on board with. There's a couple points in here, like the intuition piece, and I'm just like, I just don't follow you. Like, I just don't understand you. Like, that happened a couple times which is weird because the vast majority of the book I found myself thinking, like, he's a pretty good writer. Like, I genuinely enjoy reading this. I kept looking forward to picking it up. I don't think that this is one I would recommend to very many people because I think it's too intense for most people. Like, the number of people I know that would be interested in doing something like this is quite small. So to just put a blanket, you should read this statement out there, I don't think I would do that without knowing you or knowing your situation. Like, I need to know more about why you're interested in this book before I would say you should read it. So all of that said, I have some qualms. I have some things I really like about it. So I'm going to put it at a 4.0. All that to say, I did enjoy, and I'm glad to have read it. I just don't think I would reread it. I'm like you in that sense.
All right.
There we go.
And I should say that I think I agree with you that in the right situation, this book could be very, very beneficial. And if you have a project that you know is kind of like a tipping point for you personally or professionally, it may be worth looking at this prior to embarking on that thing. I totally understand and admittedly recognize that I'm not the person this is really written for.
Sure. No, that's fair. Now, with all that said, let's put Ultralearning on the shelf. Next time we talk, Mike, we're going to cover Super Better by Jane McGonigal, a revolutionary approach to getting stronger, happier, braver, and more resilient. Jane McGonigal is the sister to, drawing a blank on her name right now, Kelly McGonigal. There we go. And we did a book by her. It was the second book we ever did, Willpower Instinct.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to going through this one. The main reason I picked it is because of fighting Lyme disease. I want to know her process because, one, it's a long book, and two, it's about the process of gamifying like the healing and strength process. So I'm very curious. I know she's a big gamer, so this will be an interesting book for sure.
On the topic of gaming, I have to share that I have a new game that I'm obsessed with. My whole family is obsessed with. And that is the Untitled Goose Game.
See, like, this is like making the rounds like everywhere. I really thought you were gonna say like Mario Brothers or something, or Tetris, like something old school.
This is amazing. It's number one on the bestsellers charts right now for the Switch.
Of course.
And the whole idea is that you're this goose who just gets into all this mischief. It's hilarious. I play it and my kids just like sit and laugh at the stuff you have to do. It's amazing. Goose.game is the URL.
Goose.game. All right. Wow.
The one after that is Principles by Ray Dalio. So thanks to all the Bookworm members who have voted for that one. This has been on my radar for a long time. Joe, I know you read this a while back as a Gap book.
Yep. I read it a while back. So I have it. I'm looking at it right now. So that'll be a good one. That'll be a good one to talk about.
I recognize this is a big one, but it's a big one that I want to read, unlike Sapiens, which I just keep putting off.
I think it's
We're going to read it at some point. At some point, we will.
I think it's hilarious that you're putting off a long book because it's a long book with a long book. Like that.
Well,
that's
so not
weird
exactly what's going on here. At this point, it's putting off the long book because there's a better long book.
Oh, okay. I am going to okay, so mark this. If you rate Sapiens higher than Principles, you are wrong in saying it's a better book.
It's true. It's true. I will admit that I am wrong. I'm not afraid to admit my failures anymore.
All right. Fair enough. What do you got for a Gap book, Mike?
I don't really have a Gap book, but I will put here because we've started to go through this with some of the guys at my church, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin. So I'm reading it again, basically.
Nice.
And don't have time in the next couple of weeks to really tackle another book.
Sure.
So I'll put that one there.
Makes sense. Well, between here and Super Better, I'm reading Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. I found this for $2 at a local thrift store. And I had opinions about Malcolm Gladwell before, and I'm sure I'm either going to reinforce those or deny them. I don't know. We'll find out. But it'll be an interesting read regardless.
All right. I want to say thank you to all of the Bookworm Premium Club members. If you want to become a Premium Club member, you can get a couple bonuses. You can get access to the MindNode files, the Gap episode audios that Joe's been putting together. You can attend the live Bookworm recordings and join us in the chat. Thank you to everybody who is already a Bookworm Premium Club member and willing to pitch in a couple bucks a month to make this thing go. We really appreciate that. And if you are interested in becoming a premium member, you can do so by going to club.bookworm.fm/membership. And in Overcast, which is where the vast majority of people listen to podcasts, it seems, you just have to tap on the little button on the bottom and it'll take you right there. So thanks to our Bookworm Premium Club members for supporting the show. And thanks to Marco for making it easy.
I also absolutely love the wallpaper that members get. You made this thing and I love it. I use it all the time. Well done, sir.
Thank you.
Also, like I mentioned early on, I've been doing a bunch of stuff on Instagram. So if you're going to do anything today, follow us on Instagram, bookworm.fm on Instagram. Keep it simple. That said, pick up Super Better. We'll go through that one next time and figure out how to game our health.